Your modern heart beats to a rhythm dictated by boxes. You wake up in a box. You work inside a box. You scroll through a digital grid of boxes. You sort human emotion into rigid, labeled categories. You look at love through a binary lens. You believe that the boundaries of modern relationships have always been the default setting of the human animal. You assume that your prehistoric ancestors lived by the same strict, institutional rules that govern your life today. You view history as a straight line of moral and social progress. You assume that your ancestors were more primitive, more brutal, and less emotionally complex than you are. But you are wrong. Step into the deep, dark night of the late Pleistocene savanna, 40,000 years ago. The air is cool. It carries the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Your body is pressed close against the other members of your foraging band around a roaring campfire. There are no bedroom walls here to separate people into isolated couples. There are no private property deeds to fight over. There are no legal marriage certificates stamped by a distant state government. In this world, survival does not depend on an isolated nuclear family structure. It depends entirely on the absolute, unyielding cohesion of the tribe. How did intimacy actually function when the modern rules did not exist? For over a century, early Western anthropologists walked into traditional hunter-gatherer societies. They carried the heavy cultural baggage of Victorian biases. When they observed two men sharing a deeply intimate bond, or individuals who transcended the concepts of male and female, they either ignored it entirely or locked it away in secret notebooks. They viewed prehistoric human evolution through a narrow, hyper-focused lens of pure, mechanical reproduction. They assumed that every single human interaction in the deep past was just a mathematical calculation to pass on DNA to the next generation. They painted a picture of the past that looked exactly like a conservative 20th century suburb populated by cavemen. This mechanical view of the past is a profound historical error. Consider the groundbreaking research of anthropologist Polly Wiessner. She spent decades studying the social networks and campfire conversations of the Jew/Hoansi hunter-gatherers. She discovered that up to 80% of nighttime talk around the fire was not about hunting strategies, economic transactions, or biological reproduction. It was about stories, humor, social bonding, myths, and resolving interpersonal friction. Intimacy in a nomadic tribe was not a transactional system designed solely to produce infants. It was the vital emotional glue that prevented the group from fracturing into violent internal conflict. Without that emotional glue, the tribe would split apart. In the unforgiving wilderness, a split tribe is a dead tribe. What happens to a tribe when intimacy is allowed to flow without modern restrictions? You look closely at the archaeological and ethnographic record. A completely different reality emerges. In the vast, open spaces of the ancient world, same-sex bonds were not seen as evolutionary dead ends or shameful aberrations. They were recognized as powerful diplomatic alliances. Two hunters who shared a deep, physical, and emotional intimacy formed an unbreakable partnership within the larger band. A prehistoric cave bear cornered them in a dark limestone cavern, or a rival group challenged their foraging territory. These pairs fought with a fierce, unified loyalty. Their love was not an evolutionary mistake. It was a survival strategy that kept the entire band alive. Why would nature allow non-reproductive love to persist throughout human evolution? The answer lies in a concept that scientists call kin selection. It is heavily documented by evolutionary biologists across hundreds of social species. In a tight-knit ancestral band, your survival is intimately linked to the survival of your nieces, nephews, and cousins. They share your genetic lineage. An individual who forms same-sex attachments does not abandon the evolutionary race or lower the tribe's fitness. Instead, they become an elite provider, a dedicated protector, and an unburdened caretaker for the community's youth. They are free from the constant, exhausting demands of nursing and carrying their own infants. They are the ultimate safety net for a community constantly living on the knife edge of starvation. Can an ancient artifact prove the existence of these alternative social roles? Look at the extraordinary archaeological discoveries from the Upper Paleolithic site of Dolní Věstonice. It is located in the modern-day Czech Republic. Excavators uncovered a triple burial dating back nearly 30,000 years. It contained 3 young individuals laid together in a highly ritualized, intimate arrangement. The central skeleton possessed developmental anomalies that blurred the lines of biological sex, while the individuals on either side were biologically male. One male hand was placed delicately over the central individual's pelvis. The other partner's arm was intertwined in an eternal embrace. The entire burial was treated with immense respect. This ancient grave does not tell a story of rigid, modern gender roles. It tells a story of a community that deeply valued individuals who existed between the lines of male and female. These people were not marginalized, hidden away, or treated as outcasts by their prehistoric peers. They were buried at the very heart of the settlement, covered in precious red ochre pigment and adorned with wolf teeth ornaments. Their unique identities were celebrated in life and consecrated in death. How many other ancient graves have been mislabeled by modern researchers? They could not imagine a past different from their present. How many ancient warriors or leaders have been shoved into wrong categories by biased scientists? Consider the concept of the third gender. It is an identity that modern society often treats as a brand new invention. In many traditional, unbroken human lineages, individuals who embodied both masculine and feminine spirits were revered. This was true for the indigenous tribes of North America or the ancient communities of the Pacific Islands. Anthropologists document these roles across hundreds of distinct cultures, often referred to today under the broad umbrella of two-spirit identities. These individuals were frequently chosen to be the spiritual leaders, the keepers of tribal history, and the neutral mediators during fierce internal disputes. They possessed a unique psychological perspective. They could understand the lived experiences of both sides of the tribe. They were seen as doubly blessed, possessing 2 windows into the human soul. They were the ultimate peacekeepers in a world where internal conflict meant certain death. In a small foraging band of 30 people, a bitter jealousy or a prolonged domestic feud could easily cause the entire group to shatter. Without courts, police forces, or stone prisons, the tribe relied on fluid social structures to maintain equilibrium. Marriage in the deep past was not an exclusive, jealous contract. It was not designed to restrict human affection or control property. It was a flexible arrangement. It often shifted as the seasons changed or as the demographic needs of the band evolved. Affection, warmth, and physical touch were shared openly among companions, lowering stress hormones like cortisol across the entire community. Your ancestors did not suffer from the intense, crushing isolation that defines modern urban life. They lived in a world where your emotional support system was the entire group. It was not a single romantic partner carrying the weight of all your psychological needs. If a relationship failed or shifted, you were still surrounded by a network of people. They held you, fed you, and kept you safe. There were no lonely apartments, no single-occupancy isolation chambers, and no feelings of being completely forgotten by the world. Love was a collective resource, a communal fire that kept everyone warm, rather than a private commodity hoarded behind locked doors. Why did this fluid, open way of living disappear from the human experience? The shift began with the invention of agriculture, roughly 10,000 years ago. This event completely disrupted human psychology. When humans stopped moving and started clearing land, they began to accumulate private property. Suddenly, it mattered immensely who owned which plot of dirt, who owned which herd of animals, and exactly which child would inherit that wealth. Women's bodies became controlled assets. Relationships were forced into strict, rigid legal frameworks to ensure clear lines of biological inheritance. The fluid, adaptive bonds of the hunter-gatherer savanna were systematically crushed to serve the needs of kingdoms, empires, and taxes. You were taught to believe that this modern system is the natural order of things. You were conditioned to view any lifestyle outside of this narrow, property-focused box as a modern deviation or a threat to civilization. But human history stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. The agricultural era is nothing more than a tiny, recent blink of an eye. For 99% of your evolutionary journey, your ancestors lived in the fluid warmth of the tribe. They knew that human connection is too vast, too beautiful, and too vital for survival to be trapped inside a single rigid definition. They valued the hunter who loved his brother in arms, and they honored the healer who walked between genders. You live in a hyper-connected digital world. Yet you are lonelier than any human who ever walked the prehistoric savanna. You are forced to conform to highly structured, commercialized versions of romance. You turn love into a competitive status symbol. You look back at the ancient past and pity your ancestors for their lack of technology, their rough stone tools, and their cold nights in dark caves. You believe that your modern definitions of identity and partnership represent the absolute peak of human emotional progress. You stare at your screen, longing for a deep, unconditional sense of belonging that your modern lifestyle continuously denies you. But as you look closer at the ancient embers, your modern reality begins to unravel. The people who painted the deep walls of Chalvet Cave did not spend their lives fighting against their own nature. They did not lock their hearts into artificial, state-sanctioned boxes or fear the fluid boundaries of human affection. They understood that love, in all of its diverse and non-reproductive forms, was the primary force. It kept the terrifying darkness of the prehistoric wilderness at bay. They knew that survival required every single heart to beat together as one single tribe. Your modern heart beats to a rhythm dictated by boxes, but it still yearns for the open, boundless warmth of the ancient campfire.